And going. All right. We are live. Okay. Good evening, everybody. This is Patrick Millikin from the Poison Pen Bookstore here in Scottsdale, Arizona. And thanks for tuning in to another of our virtual events. And I am delighted to have Katia Lief with us today to talk about her amazing new book called Invisible Woman. And yeah, welcome, Katia.
Thanks for having me. I'm really happy to be here to talk about this.
Yeah, there's so much to talk about in this case. Can you maybe just sort of set the stage for it? It's a book that kind of captures so much about what's been going on in for the last 5 or 6 years,
Hmm.
maybe a little bit longer. And in
Right.
the acknowledgments of the book, you talk a little bit about all the different forces that led to the book's gestation. Can
Hmm.
you talk about that a little bit?
Right. Well, it's when the Me Too movement suddenly happened, um, it felt like permission in a way to write about these things that have been burning in me for a long time. And I think every woman, and part of the whole issue that movement and Time's Up sort of laid bare was that we hadn't been allowed to really talk about it. It was rude and unpleasant to talk about it, um, even aggressive to talk about it. So all of a sudden we were talking about it, and it was a great moment for people who had been fairly feeling somewhat suppressed. And at the same, and I guess coming out of that, I just happened upon a film retrospective I live in Brooklyn, and BAM, Brooklyn Academy of Music, was having a retrospective. And I don't remember what it was called. In my book, it became Lost and Forgotten Women Filmmakers of the 80s and 90s. And I don't remember what it was called in reality, but in my mind, that it was something like that, and then became that in the book. And it felt so awful, even though it was an acknowledgement and a saying, "Hey, let's look at these women who used to have something going on, and then we kind of forgot about them and we lost them." And that got me really going with this idea, and I wanted to explore it, and I wanted to write about it. So then that's where my character Joni came from. And she, just as I thought about it and gestated on it, she became a woman who was in her 50s, and suddenly with this new clarity and this ability to kind of name things, and there were suddenly phrases, shorthand phrases for things. Um, she kind of turned around and looked into her past as if the lens had been wiped clean, and she saw it differently and clearly, and it was confusing and upsetting and shocking. And I think for a lot of women who are older, um, as as we came through the last, say, 5 years, everyone's cheering and it's great, but what about all the choices and decisions I made in the past that were affected by the status quo? And I wanted to examine that. And that's where Joni came from.
And Joni is an artist,
Yeah.
and a filmmaker,
Right.
and so I mean the kind of the device that gets the story going is this uh, Lou Pridgeon is his name. Um, he's this what is he exactly? He's a movie producer or
It's like a mogul, like a Harvey
Harvey
Weinstein
Weinstein kind of
type,
guy,
stand-in. Yeah, absolutely.
a
He's
fat cat.
a Hollywood mogul, a movie mogul. Right.
Right. And so, all these different women have come forward,
Right.
and so that's the kind of the impetus for Joni to go back at 25 years into the past. And
Hmm.
she and this other really interesting woman, Val, they share this period of time together. And I don't know, maybe talk a little bit about them and that incident, I guess.
Sure. So when this news breaks, and in the novel, it happens in the first page, it really sparks the story. Um, Joni, and we're in Joni's head at that point, and Joni thinks about Val and what happened to Val, and that this man had also raped Val 25 years earlier. And when they were young women in Hollywood making their way, Val as an actress, Joni as a filmmaker, and they were roommates and best friends, and they took a kind of a vow of secrecy. They would never speak of this. They wouldn't tell anyone, they wouldn't talk about it because it would ruin them. They felt no one would believe them. They'd be kind of belittled and mocked, and they'd be cast aside. And they just thought, there's no point, we're not going to. And they promised each other that they'd keep quiet. So then forward 25 years, suddenly you don't need to suddenly keeping quiet's not, you don't have to, and maybe you don't want to anymore. And Joni felt very strongly that maybe Val would be comfortable coming forward. It had happened to Val. So she starts trying to reach out to Val. She has to find her. They've lost touch with each other. So she hunts her down and she finds her on Facebook under a married name. And at this point, they're both living on the East Coast in two different places, Joni in New York and Val in New Jersey. And she finds her and she messages her and she doesn't hear back. She's like, oh God. And it really gnaws at her and days go by. And then we switch into Val's point of view and we start to get to know Val a little bit. And she's gotten this message. She's heard from Joni and oh boy, she does not want to pull that veil back.
Right.
So she's reluctant. And there's this kind of tension between them that takes place in silence because they're not communicating until Val decides to respond. And then they start to communicate about it. And Joni pushes her, this is your time.
Right.
You can talk about this now. And it would also, it'll help. It'll help all these other women. Don't you want to do this? And Val just doesn't. So, and what happens inside Joni is that she just really struggles with that. They both struggle with it in different ways. Val hasn't told her husband. Joni's never spoken to her husband about it. And there's a lot that they both have to do at home, really, to talk about to the people closest to them if they're going to do anything with this. So there's a lot of that going on. Yeah.
Right. And they both have kind of like these conversations with their spouses about it.
Right.
And also, it's really interesting looking at both these women and sort of the choices that they've made. When that incident occurred at this Hollywood party where Val was, raped by two men, um,
Right.
that it seemed to me that that was kind of the incident that sort of, I don't know, it sort of in some ways stopped them in their tracks anyway.
Yeah.
It's like Val ultimately chose a very different path and, ultimately married and, became a teacher and found
Right.
another life that was very fulfilling for her.
Hmm.
Seemed very quite happy actually
Right.
in her life and very protective of it,
Hmm.
and
Yes.
so and
Yeah.
so all of this stuff is from her past that, you know, it's just really interesting, and it seemed very real that she they both have very different ways of dealing with this and what happened, and Joni, meanwhile, 25 years later, she's looking back. She had all this early promise, early success as a filmmaker,
Right. Right.
and produced two really
Two. Two.
acclaimed.
Yes.
I was
Yes.
thinking a little bit of Allison Anders.
Right.
You know
Yes.
her?
I know of her, but
She was
There,
gas, food, and lodging, I think.
oh,
They're really good
yes,
films
I
from
remember
the 90s.
that.
Yeah.
Yeah. But that's the thing there, Joni, it was a fictional, is a fictional character based on all these people, and they're men too, but I'm focusing on women. And I think more women in this category of who really got a good start and then suddenly just vanished. What
Mm,
happened to them? Where did they go? Um, yeah, so Joni in this story, while Val has gone off and really made different choices, and Joni is still in the world of film. And she's because her husband grew to prominence as her career stalled and she became a mother, his career totally took off. And he has, like um, scandalous Lou Pridgeon, the rapist, he has also a mogul, more in the television side of it. And so Joni's still living in the world, seeped in the world, and seeped in this kind of male point of view, right? In that she lives more in her husband's world than he lives in hers. And they've just moved from California to New York when the story opens. So she's out of place, literally out of place. So she's, and I wanted her to be very uncomfortable at the beginning of the story. So I yanked her out of her home. She's in a brand new place. Her husband's got this fabulous success. And and all of a sudden her head is spinning and she's looking backward through this crystal clear lens, and it's not going well for her.
right. There's a sense that she kind of, put aside her own career, we think temporarily, maybe at first, because she really wanted to raise a family and have children and all that. And then somehow just kind of got swept up
Right.
in things, right?
In her case, so um it was more that her career stalled at the same moment that she became a mother. Those two things conflated. Um, and so it seems as if that motherhood kind of sidelined her, but actually she was already being sidelined because in the book I describe how her first film, which was an independent film, she just made it on her own, and her own voice, her own vision, and it won awards. It did great, and then she got a big studio movie. So then she was put behind a lot of money, and she made a big movie, and there there was a lot of pressure to change because she was a feminist filmmaker, right?
Right.
And there was a lot of pressure for her to change the ending of that second movie, to water it down. And she worried that if she didn't, she would lose her career. So she did. And then it wasn't such a great movie. It was an okay movie, but it
Right.
wasn't a movie with her voice. So she made a compromise. She kind of buckled to pressure. Which she wouldn't have had to, but she did because of all, and I go, all these forces that are on women. And this is what I try to really examine is the quiet forces that kind of hold you down. That used to, especially, that were very, very powerful. And you would think it, you would feel it, you wouldn't quite get it. Maybe you'd blame yourself for it. It was a lot of women were very confused at that time about what was going on. Um, and in her case, she made a bad choice based on kind of fear and insecurity that she would lose her career if she didn't go the way they wanted. And she kind of did lose it because she lost her confidence,
Right.
right? She lost her confidence. She didn't make the work that she would have made left to her own devices. So she became a mother at about the same time. So those two things conflated for her.
In your mind, her longtime marriage is coming apart.
Right.
Um, I mean, you established that very early on. And what a wonderfully created sleaze bag.
Thank you.
Yeah, it's high. Yeah, it's just such a douchebag. I mean, in so many ways. And he, but he's not out of central casting though. I mean, he has his own kind of interesting menace, I guess you could say. Um, when do you think she intuitively knew that it was a bad decision?
Intuitively. I think the intuitive
Was she
feeling.
fighting against it? You think that
Yeah, she was
intuition?
absolutely fighting against it. She didn't want, she didn't want to know, and she didn't even know that she didn't want to know.
Right.
It just wasn't there for her to know in her field of vision, right? Because this was her life.
Yeah.
This was her husband and the father of her children. And I think she just she didn't have a clue and she wasn't looking for any clues. And there was nothing obvious. There was nothing. It was very well buried, his true nature, or the things he had done in the past, before he knew her. Um, and then as she begins to recognize that he's manipulating her and controlling her, she begins to actually see it. Um, and then that's when the intuition becomes articulated and she begins to get it more, and she sees what's going on with Val at the same time, and
Yep.
these things are just becoming so the clarity that she had gained in hindsight, looking back, she's now getting for her present.
Right.
She's thinking more clearly, and she's seeing things that they're not great, they're
Yeah.
hard. Yeah.
Right. I gotta ask, I have a green one of these on my wall in the kitchen. This
You do?
the kitty clock. Yeah. And it's so this, although it's not doesn't have a lot of stage time, it seems to me that it has an important place in the book. This clock, it really does mean something. Uh, am I stretching? Or
um you know It came out of nowhere. It's right there at the beginning. It's on the wall, and I invoke it again later.
right?
But what it does at the very, very beginning, what I wanted it to do, and I hope it does do, is with its, the shifting eyes and the shifting tail, just sort of plunked on a kitchen wall, and she's a woman in a kitchen, and there's this thing that's just sort of there, and it's a little bit sinister. It's also retro, and it was just meant to set a mood, to set a tone.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think actually, I didn't say to a cover designer, put that on the cover. They just did it. And when I saw it, I was like, yes. Oh yeah, they chose that image from the book, and I was really happy about that.
Yeah, because it seems like, it's some kind of interesting. She looks at it at particular moments throughout the book,
Right.
very cool.
She notices it. And it's because
Yeah,
she senses it's noticing her in a way.
right.
Eyes are moving back and forth,
Exactly.
and it's there, and it's just, ooh, yeah.
Do you have one?
I don't. I
I
should though.
need to get one.
I know. I've got to get one. I just saw one in the gift shop at the Museum of Modern Art, and I was like, "Oh my God!" And why didn't I buy it? I don't know.
Well, you can send a bill to Morgan Entrikin, right?
Okay, Morgan, is that okay?
Um, so Patricia Highsmith, before we got started here live, I was saying how much of a fellow fan I am of Patricia Highsmith, and her work uh, really does play an interesting role in this book. Um, we get the sense that Joni feels a real artistic kinship with Highsmith throughout, and talk about that a little bit.
Okay, so I feel a kinship with Patricia Highsmith as a crime writer. I know it's not unique to me. She's weird and fantastic for the people who love her. They really love her. Some people maybe, I guess, don't. But so because at the time I was coming up with this idea also was thinking a lot about Patricia Highsmith and had also decided to go back and read, fill in my blank spots. I gave it to Joni and I was like, Joni's going to have this Patricia Highsmith obsession. I had been through it once before and I was revisiting my Patricia Highsmith obsession. And so with Joni, the story is that when they were young in their 20s, Val had given her a set of Patricia Highsmith novels. And Joni had read some of them, gotten kind of obsessed with them, and they had inspired her first film, the one that won awards and was successful. And then she had gotten kind of burned out on reading them because it's intense. If you read a lot of them all at once, it's kind of intense. At some point,
Yeah.
you just have to say, I
You
need
have
a
to
break,
take a little break. Yeah.
little break. And so at the opening of the novel, she's thinking about Val and this news has broken, stuff's happening, and she spots them on her shelf. And she pulls them out and she says, I'm gonna catch up on the books that Val gave me that I never read. There were several that she had never actually read. So
Ooh,
she sets about doing that. And she, as her story with Val is unfolding, um, Joni is reading these novels and they're really getting into her head. Um, and as her marriage is starting to unravel, the kind of malevolence that's in the voice of every Highsmith protagonist starts to seep into Joni's head.
right.
And she starts to kind of starts to weave into her thinking and her imagination. She's also trying to write another screenplay. It's not going well, but as she's kind of opening up this creative process, what gets in her mind is actually the Highsmith voice. So it
Yes.
hijacks her imagination a little bit, and and she starts to kind of not really get clarity from it, but develop courage, a kind of misplaced courage, I would say, um, out of it. So
Right. Right.
in my heart, I wanted to try to write a modern Highsmith, and I knew that that couldn't really be done. But I thought, I want to try to. And in the very first draft of this, I was really going for a voice that really evoked her. And then through several other drafts, I toned it down and I changed it because you just can't. Just yeah,
Well, there's certain things about yeah, there's this quality of Highsmith that I guess it's hard to really articulate. Um,
yes,
but I'm just trying to think. I hesitate to call Joni an unreliable narrator, but in some ways she kind of
I think she
there's
is.
elements of that. Yeah, you kind
She
of
tells you part of the story.
and there's a certain surreality to some of the scenes. Um, and this really interesting side kind of episode where with this Wally character,
Mhm.
really love that. It was so interesting. Um, boy,
Mm.
what can you say about that?
Oh boy. Um, so basically, Wally, eh, she has, before the story opens, she had sent out her old videotapes of home movies, things she couldn't watch anymore. She didn't have the equipment anymore, and she had sent them out to be digitized so they could be online and she could have them. Um, and the outfit she chose turned out to be a really bad company run by these young guys, especially Wally, who they were just falling apart and the business closed. She couldn't get her footage back. She thought she had lost all these memories, the home movies of her children and her family, and she was just angry and she couldn't, he was kind of ghosting her for a while and then he'd reach out and so he lived near her, or his workspace was nearby her and she hunts him down. So this becomes the first trigger and an outlet for her, a sense of aggression, right? Where the
Yeah,
anger, instead of sucking it back, she's just angry at him.
right.
Okay, she's going to be angry. She's going to be angry at this guy for messing up her family member movies, her home movies. So she hunts him down, and I probably shouldn't say what she does to him when she
No,
and
no,
I no, but she crosses a line, and Highsmith is what goes through her mind in that scene. Highsmith becomes the permission slip, the thing
right.
she wants to kind of, try. So so those forces of this kind of unleashed anger, and the Highsmith voice click together in that scene, and it unleashes a little something in her.
Yeah. Well, have you read Ivy Pacota's books? Do you know
No,
that writer?
I know, but I have not read her.
Well, she's really interesting. I recommend her to your attention. But her latest book deals with some of these themes, which is, in our culture, men, uh, their I don't know, their violent impulses are accepted, you know, whereas women's are not, you
Right.
know, and her latest novel really deals with that, these violent, and some of that seemed to come out in Joni, you know,
Yes.
um,
Yes.
not
Yes.
just this I think, how do you put it? Not just the capability for violence, but the desire for it,
Right. So it
which is kind
becomes
of a taboo, right?
right. It's a shattering of a taboo. So first there's the recognition of this urge to do some kind of violence, and a fight with it, because you have to fight with it, hopefully. Um, and then in that Wally scene, a sensation of wanting it also. And
Right.
that's something that also came out of Highsmith, in that her protagonists, when they, and Ripley is I think a good example. Um, he seems like a nice guy on the outside. In some of the books, he lives in the south of France. He has a beautiful house, plays the harpsichord. He has this nice French wife. They have meals. We hear all about the meals in the garden and stuff. But then something goes wrong, and he has to do something about it. And what's so chilling about it is that there's it doesn't really bother him. He just does it. And he's mastered this. He almost seems to enjoy it. There's no big giant relishing of it, but I think it's the mastery that he enjoys. And so for Joni, it's recognizing this impulse, and then in sort of alongside shame for it, feeling like it's something that maybe she could master. Maybe she could be good at this. And then
Right.
try not to think it, but it's a battle. Yeah.
And also she's been swallowing, so much bullshit for 25 years, and it's just
Right.
become so ingrained in her
Right.
to not to cause conflict, just to
Right.
kind of take it.
Well,
And
yeah, and I think that's typical of most women, because
her daughter sees it.
her daughter sees it. Her daughter is, of course, a younger gener that your daughter can name it, um, and talk and challenge her, and talk about it. And eventually Joni can too. Eventually. I've written a second book that's a follow-up. And in
Really?
that book, she looks at all this. She looks at, you know, what happened inside her, and what is the meaning of it, and how does she feel about it, and other things.
Right. Wow. Very cool. Let's see. Boy, there's so much to get into here. Um, Maybe let's stray for a few minutes and tell us a little bit about your career in general. I remember when you did two as Karen Ellis,
Yeah, yeah,
right? And
yeah.
were those published by Mulholland?
Mulholland, yes.
Yeah, I remember
Yeah,
those. I remember really, really liking those
yes.
books.
Oh, thank you.
And
Thank
that
you.
was like 4 or 5 years ago, something like that.
Yeah, yeah. It was
Yeah.
before the pandemic.
Was
Yeah,
that
well, I've been writing crime novels for probably at least 20 years. And before, when I started, my first two published novels were small press literary novels. That's kind of where my heart was. And then when I veered to, I wanted to try to write a suspense novel. I just wanted to do that. I had been, I had always been writing um, and suspense as an element of storytelling seemed interesting to me and a little bit unreachable. I wanted to understand it. So I decided I would do it, and then what did that mean? So I started to learn about it and to read. And I wrote a novel and it was published. And that was my first pseudonym. And that was a pseudonym I took because the sale of that book happened so sort of fast and furiously. There was a bidding war. I knew nothing about the mystery world. I didn't know what I was doing really. And my then agent suggested, you could use a pseudonym. You can, because that way you just see what happens. And I just kind of glommed onto a pseudonym. Um, and I was given contracts for one book after another. And 4 books later, I had 4 novels. And I was really learning on the job. I felt, and they were, book a year, tight deadlines. My kids were little. It was kind of crazy when I think back to it. Um,
What was that pseudonym?
it was Kate Pepper.
Okay.
Kate Pepper. So she did pretty well here. She did amazingly well in Germany.
Really?
Yes. And so I was told, I mean, I was hearing about it from people in Germany and I had no idea what was going on there, but yeah. So anyway, um, I wanted, long story, I wanted to I wanted to change publishers. So part of that when I got it another publisher was that they were fine either way if I used the pseudonym or dropped it. I decided to drop it because I wasn't that comfortable with the pseudonym. I
Hmm.
personally, I'm not an actress. I just didn't feel comfortable with it. So then I started publishing under my name, Katia Lief. Um, and again, it was book after book after book after book. And I was like chugging along. And and then, a similar kind of thing happened. I think I was feeling a bit burned out. I felt I was writing a lot of more like procedurals and more from the police side of things.
Mhm.
And I was starting to really crave writing about what went on before the crime was committed, the lead up to the crime. And I wanted to get into the heads of the criminals and not write about police. So it was kind of a shift for me. So, that's where Karen Ellis came in. So that was kind of, and the first one, A Map of the Dark, is police,
Yeah.
is an investigator. But I gave myself room to make it more character driven. And the powers that be around me felt that was enough of a shift, that a name shift was in order, and we just sort of went with it. And those were those 2 books. And when that was all done, I really slammed on the brakes and said, okay, I want to write. I want to write about a woman. I want to write about her in a kind of with taking a very stark look at her inner life. And although there is one small detective part in Invisible Woman, it's not going to be about that stuff. It's going to really go into her in a way that's more sociological almost, right? And I was feeling that strongly, and at the same time, Me Too and Time's Up happened, and that was permission. I really feel that before that, if I had written more overtly on this subject, my guess is I probably would have been urged by my colleagues to back off. Um, that was how I felt. Now, maybe I was wrong, but that was how I felt.
Mm.
Maybe I just didn't feel confident enough. So this time I just said, there was just no question of another pseudonym. I'd had it with pseudonyms. it was well understood, and that was it. I just wasn't going to do it anymore. I just felt like, you get to a point in your life where, at least for me, having published so many novels and written for so long, um, I want to do it my way. I want to write what I want to write. Um,
Absolutely.
I mean, I'm always flexible with revisions and all that, and I have, but it has to have meaning. It has to have meaning as on the level of the characters, the people, and also the literary qualities, the quality of the writing there has to be room for it to breathe. It's important to me. So yeah, so that's where I am now.
Now, with the two characters, two main characters, Joni and Val, um, is there, it, you get the sense that you sympathize and you empathize with both of them.
Mhm.
Is there one that you feel closer to?
I probably feel closer to Joni only because I wrote more of her first. I brought Val in. Val was not a voice in the narrative. She did not have a narrative voice until a later draft. And then I pulled her in and then I wrote more and more of her. And as I did that, um, I I related to her in a very different way. Um, because my life, I have a life that has the stability of Val's. And I wrote about it. I brought it in. Um, I also have a life that has similarities to Joni's in that I'm a creative person and I have a husband who's in the film business. So Joni first, but then Val kind of came in, and in the next book, they're really given equal weight.
Oh,
So
great.
yeah,
Yeah. Well, I was just thinking, in particular with the Highsmith books that you choose, in some ways, Joni, this might be a stretch too, but I was thinking in particular of Edith's Diary, which is just such a masterpiece. And it's one of these, yeah, you get the sense that this woman is just caught in the wrong place and time.
right.
It's I think it's set in the 50s, isn't it?
I think so.
And she is an artist and she is a writer.
Right,
And she's living this mundane uh 1950s Leave It to Beaver kind of world with its inherent darkness underneath.
right.
That's the thing that's so interesting about the whole noir period to me.
Oh
It's
yeah,
the Norman Rockwell facade and then
right.
the real story underneath,
Exactly.
you know.
Exactly. Yeah.
And isn't it, if I remember correctly with Edith's Diary, isn't her father-in-law living with them at the house? And
I don't remember.
yeah,
Is he? I
old
remember
man's
this
living with them.
husband, the son. Oh yes, the old man.
Yeah,
Yeah,
living with
and
them,
she's really poor Edith. She's sort of
going mad.
going mad. She's put upon from every direction, and she has no recourse. And it all sort of turns inward. And yeah, yeah,
You
that was
think
a
she could
powerful.
run off to Greenwich Village or something like that?
No,
But
no, I
that's just
mean, yeah, I think so.
unavailable to her.
Yeah, it wasn't available to her in her world and her time, and also within herself as a person. I think very few people in reality back then did that.
Right.
And even, now, but you don't have to now. So, yeah, yeah, I thought that was, it was also, Highsmith rarely wrote from the perspective of a woman. Have you noticed that?
When you mention that in the book, I'm like, oh, maybe you're right.
Yeah, she writes mostly from male points of view. Um, and it's pretty interesting. And I've been thinking, a little about what kind of a writer she would be, how she would do it today. If she were alive today. First of all, she'd probably get canceled really fast just for her
Really
personality.
fast. Really.
But yeah. So um, but she was a lesbian, and I think she lived openly in her private world, maybe, but publicly was not something she could ever open up about. And in her fiction, when she did write about it, was in The Price of Salt.
Right,
Made movie was Carol.
right.
Um, they wouldn't publish it.
That's right.
She kept publishing her publisher, I believe, wouldn't publish it, so they had to find another publisher, and it was published under a pseudonym.
Yep.
Um, and that was off her big success with Strangers on a Train. So it was a time where she had to really hide herself. Um, and so it doesn't surprise me whatsoever that her protagonists were almost always men. I think that I can't say this definitively, and I would love to know. Um, I think a lot of women who are writers would write with male protagonists because women were not considered heroic, certainly, or even interesting enough to carry a story. Um,
And also, didn't you say somewhere that Highsmith felt like she had been born into the wrong body?
right. Yeah, apparently from reading her biography.
Yeah.
And she kind of lived that way a little. I mean, she did some cross-dressing um and stuff. And she did it her own way. She lived her life, and she wrote what she wanted to write. I guess she seemed to really went to the dark side. She was mean. She
I
smoked
think
and
she kind of retreated
yeah,
into herself
yeah,
towards the end of her
yeah,
life and
yeah,
seemed to
yeah.
become very bitter and
Very bitter person. Yeah.
yeah.
And the bitterness seeps into the work too, but it's
She liked cats though, which I appreciate.
right. And snails.
And snails.
Oh
Yeah. A very complicated person.
yeah. I don't know that I'd want to actually sit down with her. I mean, I would, but I would absolutely do it, but it
Yeah,
might be a bad experience, but I'd still do it.
right. Um, let's see here. Of her books, what are some of your favorites?
Um, Probably Strangers on a Train and Edith's Diary and The Price of Salt. Um, those are the ones that pop out. Because The Price of Salt, because of the power of the the characters.
Hmm.
Um, the conflict and the suspense was embedded in them because there were these two women falling in love with each other. And that at the time was explosive on its own, so you didn't need a lot else. And uh, Strangers on a Train, the plot was just so good, the plot, the way they meet and they make this plan, which is a terrible and awful plan, but then they end up carrying it out. Um, and watching them go forward with it, and the desperation that they both experience, and digging themselves deeper and deeper into it. I just found it riveting.
Was she like 23 or something when she published
Yeah,
that?
she was really young when she wrote
Yeah.
that. Really young.
I mean, what a genius, really.
I know. Yeah.
It seemed like she and Carson McCullers were kind of coming up roughly the same time.
Yeah. Yeah.
Imagine listening to a dinner conversation with them. That would have been
That would
fascinating.
be fun. That would be
Yeah.
fun.
They were both kind of like the darlings of the Bohemian set
Right.
for a little
Right.
while. Yeah. Um,
Yep.
boy, there was yeah, nobody wrote about twisted obsession
Mm,
like she did. Uh,
mm,
we've read, I run a discussion group here at the bookstore that's dedicated to like noir fiction
mm.
and we've done a bunch of Highsmith over the years. And one of the most disturbing ones, have you ever read This Sweet Sickness?
Have I read it? I don't know if I have read that one. I have
Right.
not, I still haven't read them all because I have to go
I,
through a
I've read
final phase of finishing them. I read most of them. I don't think, oh wait, have I may have, I think I might have read that. Give me a
it's
point.
about the guy who it's really about a stalker, about a guy who becomes
Right.
dangerously obsessed with this woman. And uh, yeah, I mean, it's about a book about a stalker
Right.
and his delusions.
Right. I think I did read that. I
Yeah,
have to
really
reread
interesting.
it clearly.
Yeah. Um, yeah, I wanted to ask you also about teaching and about you teach at the new school, right?
The new school,
The new school.
which
Wow.
is if you you know if you might you don't you're not in New York, so you probably don't know about it.
Oh,
It's
of
a
course I do. Yeah, no, I
oh,
know.
you do.
I do.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's I've been teaching there for 30 years, which
Wow.
blows my mind. And I teach fiction writing workshops. And it's funny. It was never a life plan, but it's the only job outside of writing that I've ever had that I've actually liked. Um, yeah, teach college students about fiction, and I eventually came to feel that I was taking a class with them
Mm.
because the way we explore everything, and we workshop their work. It's very creative. Um, and yeah, it's great. I love it.
Are these undergrads or are they graduate
They
students?
are. Originally, it was a mix of undergrads and continuing ed students, and that was kind of wonderful because you would have teenage college students mixed with adults of all ages, and it was a great dynamic. Um, Eventually, maybe within the last, I don't know how many years, 8-ish or so years, the school has pulled away from that, and now it's just college students
I see.
in my program. Yeah. So yeah, it's great. I love it. I love working with them.
Does it kind of inform or not inform, but does it help your own work? I mean, do you get enthusiastic about it?
Yeah, I do. I do because I mean I'm always learning. I'm always learning and or in a class. And even though I'm a teacher, they bring their work in. It's their work. And it's work that I've never seen before. So there's always a lot to talk about. Um, and I have to stretch myself to talk about it. Um, because especially now that I'm teaching exclusively college students, most of them, sometimes they're pretty experienced in writing, but sometimes they are not at all. So there's
Mm,
always going to be a lot of having to kind of explain the kind of conceptual vocabulary of fiction writing to them, which means pointing it out and breaking it down in their own work. So, so I can't be a lazy reader when I read the workshop stories that come in.
gotcha.
Yeah.
Yeah. One of the members of my discussion group, he's passed away for quite a while ago now, but about 20 years ago, I think he was probably in his 70s, and he took a class from Dashiell Hammett at the New School.
Really?
Yeah, I'm almost positive it was at the New
That
School.
makes sense. That
And
would make sense.
yeah, Hammett was teaching, and he had these because we're reading, the Maltese Falcon and stuff like that, and he's talking these wonderful anecdotes about Hammett. I mean that he was impeccably dressed all the time, and
That's amazing.
just cool. And I hope I'm right about it being the New School. I want to say, yeah, that it
I
was.
don't, it would not surprise me. The thing that the new school does is its thing is to take working artists and bring them into the classroom. So
Right.
as opposed to they have it's not a school made up of mostly full-time academics.
Yeah.
Not that a lot of these working artists wouldn't like a full-time academic job with all the benefits, but the um, the model is basically working artists in the classroom. And so it would make perfect sense for Dashiell Hammett to have been in the classroom there. Absolutely.
Right. And it was quite a kind of a lefty hotbed, right, in the
Yeah.
50s and 60s. And
Yeah, and the school was really known as that for that at the time. A lot of really famous people have been there
yep.
as teachers. It's amazing to realize for me. Um, it's a cool place. Yeah.
Yeah, next time I'm in New York, I'll have to go by and check it out.
Yeah, and they have events of all kinds.
Do they?
Yep.
Cool. Well, let's see here. We should probably wrap it up, but I just wanted to say congratulations on the publication of the book. It's really terrific and will resonate with a lot of people.
Thank you. Thank you
Yeah.
so much.
Yeah. Have you sold the film rights? Or
No, we're working on it.
wouldn't that be interesting? It would be a challenge.
Uh, why would it be a challenge?
A challenge to adapt it properly.
Oh, yes, like it would depend on the filmmaker.
Yeah,
Really, what kind of movie came out of it, for sure. Yeah,
yeah,
it's because it's a very internal narrative.
absolutely.
Yeah.
Um, so you finished the follow-up to it. That's
I finished the rough draft, yeah.
okay.
And even my editor hasn't seen it yet.
No, really.
So if he happens to be watching this, he's heard more about it than he's told me before. Um, yeah, he'll get it soon.
All right, Katya. Well, I have to run downstairs and quickly uh, change gears and talk to John Talton about his 1930s set Phoenix series, which is quite
Mm.
wonderful. So, but it's been a real treat to talk with you. Thanks so much. And
Thank you.
thanks everybody for watching. Sorry I didn't get a chance to ask some of these questions, but um, there you have it. Good night.
Bye,
Thanks.
everybody.
Bye.